these scammers, man, they got balls. I love catching scammers in the act. What I don't love is when they're friends of mine. And recently, there was a dealer with whom I did quite a bit of business that was showing the warning signs of pulling essentially a CNC Exotics. If you're not familiar with CNC Exotics and Clay Tom, well, there's plenty of news stories about them, but the long and short of it is they started running out of money. They overextended themselves and tried to, well, rob Peter to pay Paul. So they were selling consignment cars, then using the proceeds from those consignments either to buy more inventory or pay their bills or whatever. And Clay was hitting up all of his customers, friends, family, etc., to invest in his business. And so not only did probably hundreds of people lose cars they had given CNC to sell that they never got paid for, or cars that they bought and never got titles for, but also people lost millions of dollars who had invested with him. That was a few years ago. And the ironic part of it was, too, is they had taken out PPP loans. It's all public record. So you'd think they'd have a nice $1 million boost from the loans they took out, but it wasn't enough. They were spending money too fast, too furious. And they blamed COVID for ruining their dealership. And I'm like, no, one, your problem started before then. And two, COVID was the greatest thing to happen to any high-end car dealership. So if you failed between 2020 and 2022, it is your own dang fault. But a friend of mine who ran Direct Auto Tennessee, he was a great Porsche guy, did a lot of GT3s together, seemed to really know his stuff. I got some phone calls about him. And thankfully I did, because I had trusted him for a long time. Every deal we had done together was great. Wire money, get the title. No excuses, no delays, no warning signs of somebody that was struggling with their cash flow. But I got a phone call that said, hey, just so you know, there's some people that Charles owes titles to, and also probably money. So keep your eyes out. I was like, oh, it's very good to know. Thank you. I haven't done any deals with him lately, but I'll check that out. Sure enough, went on Google reviews, and you look at the most recent, and a couple of them were pretty damning in terms of like, hey, I sold him a car that had a loan on it, never paid it off, or I bought a car, didn't get the title, something like that. I'm like, those are very bad Google reviews. It's not like, oh, my car broke down, they wouldn't warranty it, and it was sold as is. Like, okay, fine, whatever. So he did call me not too long after that and wanted to sell me a Porsche 968. It's like, okay, well, I'm armed with this new information, so I'm going to tread very, very carefully, but I'm also not going to show my hand and say, hey, just so you know, people think you're a scammer. So I just said, yeah, I'll buy it. And the odd thing was, like, he had run it on Bring a Trailer, and it bid to 35, and he didn't sell it. And so I was like, oh, I'll give you 30. He's like, deal, sold. It's like, well, that's kind of a red flag in and of itself that you're so quick to sell it for less than you could have gotten like 3 weeks ago. But, sometimes a dealer-to-dealer transaction is worth the quick, easy transaction. So I was like, I'm not going to wire him money because I'm just not sure of this. I did have a copy of the title, but there were some things that were odd, right? So he's like, well, it's in my personal name, but he wanted me to wire money to the dealer. I'm like, some things don't add up here. And like, if it's in your personal name, you can't reassign it because it had just been signed over to him. I said, well, you own the dealership. Why don't you just put it in your dealer name and then assign it through there? And then it's all above board. He's like, yeah, I can do that. I'm like, okay, great. Do it. And then I'll buy the car. But I had scheduled a trip a couple weeks after this to go down to Atlanta anyway. So I was like, all right, well, you know what I'll do? I told him I'm flying in next week. So I'll just fly into Nashville and pay a visit to my friend there, and I'll pick up the car. I'll bring you a check, pick up the title, and just we'll road trip it to Atlanta and road trip it home. And my wife was going to come with me too. So I was like, all right, I'm trying not to let on like I don't trust you at all, but I need to make sure that I walk out of there with the title. The night before I'm at the bar with my friend in Nashville who had alerted me to this goings on. And he gets a text from somebody that's like, are these your Porsches at this store direct out of Tennessee? Because we have a repo order from them. And they like had photos of the repo guys in there. And I was like, well, that 968 is the one I'm buying. And I texted Charles. I'm like, hey, are we still good for tomorrow, 10 a.m.? He's like, yep, everything's on schedule. So I'm like, this is weird. We're either going to show up and the car isn't there, or I don't know. He's just very confident for being on the brink of disaster. So I was like, well, I'm not gonna do anything too rash yet. I'm not gonna say anything. This could be bad information. The repo stuff was secondhand information. So again, like, don't jump to any conclusions. We're just gonna play this out and see how it goes. So my buddy takes me up to the dealer the next day, and it's open, and the 968's in there. All right, cool. Well, it's here, but Charles isn't. 10:30 goes by, 11 o'clock, and in the meantime, a few other people come into the dealer, and they're all looking for Charles. I'm like, okay then. And they seem very annoyed that he's not there. And I think one of them was the Mannheim rep, but another one was there with a clipboard, and he was looking at the VINs of all the cars. And one of them was a vintage 911, which is kind of difficult to find the VIN. So I offered my services. I said, hey, you looking for the VIN? Yeah, where is it? Oh, showed it to him. I kind of figured out why he was there. So I used the car dealer terminology so I could have a in with him for him to share privileged information. So I'm like, oh, you doing a floor plan audit? He's like, oh, yeah. It's like, all right, cool. So what that meant was the floor plan is a special type of financing for dealers where they have their inventory financed by a bank, but they have to put up a portion of the collateral. So if the car is worth 80, the floor plan company will put up 60, you have to put up 20, but it's not like a line of credit. There's what they call a curtailment period. So you have to pay it down over a period of time, and after, let's say, 120 days, you have to pay off the car. So that's why a lot of dealers have like a mandatory 90-day or 120-day wholesale order, because it's like, well, we're not going to pay it off. We're just going to wholesale it to somebody else and not outlay our cash. It's an opportunity for dealers to become highly leveraged. So yeah, he's doing a floor plan audit. I was like, cool. Well, this red Porsche, is that on your list? He checks his list. Nope, that's not on the list. I'm like, okay, well, a little more comfortable here. I'm not buying a car because sometimes with floor plans, they don't put a lien on the title. So it's not like when you look up on Carfax and somebody finances a car with Chase Bank, like, oh, okay, loan reported, like, okay, I know I have to pay it off. Like, there could be a floor plan on a car and you have no idea. I'm like, all right, well, that's a good start. It's not on their floor plan. About like 20 minutes later, another guy shows up, and I start talking with him, and he's from Next Gear Capital, another floor plan company. I was like, oh, really? He's like, yeah, we're trying to get signed up with him. And my buddy is like, I don't think a dealer can have two floor plan companies. I think that's like a no-no for the banks. Like, they don't want to share. So, I'm talking to him because, I know some of the guys at Next Gear and stuff. So again, finding common ground so that I can try to glean more information about the situation. The other guy's still walking around with a clipboard. And so the Next Gear guy's like, what's that guy doing? And I knew exactly what I was saying when I said it, because I knew that he would be very interested. And I just said, oh, floor plan audit. It's like, oh, really? All of a sudden was not interested in talking to me and my friend, and made a beeline over to the other guy with the clipboard. And they had a very serious conversation. And I'm like, this is getting interesting. I'm like, I'm not trying to sink Charles's business while I'm here. It's just things are happening around me, and I feel like everything's crumbling. I just told him he was doing a floor plan audit. I didn't think he'd be that interested in that information. So finally, Charles shows up in a flurry, and is running around, and he ignores all the people who were like following him in like a trail, trying to get his attention, all the floor plan people and everybody else. And somebody else was there with a computer, I don't know doing what, but they didn't work for the dealership. He takes me in, gives me a tour of the facility, gives me a tour next door of this service facility that he's opening up, these custom cars that he's building for himself. And I'm like, I think that's not what you should be worrying about right now, but okay. So, we get the 968 out. It's a super nice car. He's got the title in hand. I had checked the title number with the state of Tennessee. I had called everybody. I'm like, I need to make sure like I'm not getting screwed on this. So I gave him a check. I walked out there with the title. I brought a prepaid UPS label with me to drop it off at the nearest place to overnight back to my dealership so we could put it in our name in Ohio quickly in case something came up on it. I'm like, I want to have this in my name, and then nobody can come back later and have a claim against it. So before this title becomes inactive or whatever, because I've seen that happen. Somebody signs over a title and immediately gets a duplicate title, and the one that they signed over is no good. So I left with the title, with the car. It was probably the only legitimately owned one there. And as I left, all these people are accosting Charles, and I kind of felt like I was like driving away from a burning building. Like I'm the one that made it out. After this experience, I started getting phone calls from other mutual customers of Direct Auto. One of them had bought a GT3 RS, and they had bought it through the dealer, but Charles owned it personally and had a personal loan on it, never paid it off. So they ended up having to pay off the loan to get the car. So it cost them a little more than they had envisioned. Another guy, he had sold a car on consignment or something. So Charles owed him money, but he didn't have the money. So he gave him a Porsche instead, but he never got the title to the Porsche. So, I mean, it was just disaster after disaster. And there's so much more to his background that makes the story even crazier. I mean, like, I think technically he wasn't even allowed to have a dealer license because he had had past felony charges for fraud. So his dad actually had the dealer license. It was very sketchy, but once his dealer finally got shut down and his dealer license taken away or whatever happened by the state or the banks, he almost immediately opened up the new service facility. I think he called it Workstat 9 and was advertising, all Porsche specialist, yada, yada, yada. But the cover car on his website was the car that I had initially got called about by my friend that said he had bought the car from Charles but had never got the title, or Charles owed him money on it or whatever. So my friend had this car in his possession but not the title, and Charles was advertising it as the promotional car on their website for this new venture. So it's like, man, these scammers, man, they got balls. All due respect to Charles, I really liked working with him. I considered him a friend, and I don't think he intended to be a scammer. It's just what you do when things start to go wrong determines your integrity. There's bankruptcy for a reason, right? Banks and the government understand that things don't always work out and they won't always get their money. You can arrange payment plans, you can deal with your creditors that way. But to essentially see the writing on the wall and continue to take people down, especially people that you consider your friends, your clients, whatever, it's despicable, honestly. It's sad that he did that. I'm glad he didn't do it to me. Maybe he didn't have the opportunity or whatever, but I feel for all the people that get taken down in a situation like this. And I do my best when I get information to pass that along to everybody I know, but it's also difficult because until it's concrete information, it's hearsay. And if you say something about it before it's verified to be true, then you're potentially guilty of slander, libel, whatever. So it's a very fine line to walk when you get inside information to say, okay, well, is it true? Like the Repo story was sensational, but it wasn't true. It was sort of true. He ended up having his boat repoed. And then I think he actually had the lifts repoed out of his new service shop, which I'm like, holy crap, that's a bad spot. But like, honestly, by the time, like with CNC, by the time people were calling foul, it was essentially too late.
I start most of my days browsing Auto Tempest for my next bad decision of a car, but did you know that supporting Auto Tempest can also help support all the great content that they support in the automotive YouTube world? I know that you've probably enjoyed a lot of videos that they supported and a lot of channels that they've been sponsoring for years, perhaps without even knowing it. So check them out now at the link in the description below. It is the most powerful way to shop for your next car because you'll see all the listings showing up in one search, and you can search by any criteria that you want, but it also helps make automotive YouTube a much better place. So check them out now, autotempest.com, all the cars, one search.